Night my in-laws broke into my house. I was sitting in my car at the end of the driveway, watching them through a night vision camera app on my phone. They didn't know I was there. They thought I was 3 states away, grieving and falling apart. That's what my mother-in-law had been counting on. She was wrong about a lot of things that night. Let me back up. My husband Owen died 14 months before any of this happened. Pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed in March, gone by October. He was 36. I was 31. We had been married for 4 years, together for 7, and he was the most methodical, careful person I have ever known. He kept every document in labeled folders. He updated his will after every major life change. He made me sit down with him every January to review our finances together. I used to tease him about it, called him my little accountant. He'd laugh and say, "You'll thank me someday." He wasn't wrong about that either. Owen had a younger brother, Dominic. Dominic is the opposite of Owen in every measurable way. Charming, scattered, perpetually between jobs, perpetually borrowing money he never pays back. Owen loved him anyway. That's the kind of person Owen was. He saw the best in people, especially people who had given him every reason not to. Owen's parents, his mother Margaret and his father Dale, live about 40 minutes from the house Owen and I bought together in 2019. The house is in a quiet neighborhood in central Tennessee. 3 bedrooms, big backyard, a screened porch that Owen spent a full summer building himself. When he died, he left it to me. His will was clear, notarized, filed properly with the county. My name was already on the deed. We had bought it together. It was never a question legally. It became a question in other ways. The first time Margaret brought it up was at Thanksgiving, about 6 weeks after Owen's funeral. I had invited the whole family because I didn't know how to be alone in that house yet. And I thought being surrounded by people would help. We were washing dishes after dinner, just the 2 of us, and she said very casually, "Owen always said this house felt like home to the whole family." I think he would have wanted it to stay that way. I didn't know what to say. I told her I agreed, that she was always welcome, that I wanted to stay close to them because they were the closest thing I had left to Owen. She smiled and squeezed my hand, and that was that. Or so I thought. Over the next several months, small things started happening. Dale would come by unannounced and let himself in with the spare key they had from when Owen was alive. I asked for it back gently once, then again less gently. He always had a reason why he hadn't gotten around to returning it. Margaret started referring to the screened porch as Owen's porch, and then gradually as the family porch, in ways that made my presence in my own home feel conditional. Dominic borrowed $2,000 from me in January, telling me it was for a car repair, and I found out 3 weeks later he had used it to pay off a credit card. When I brought it up, Margaret said, "Family doesn't keep score." I started keeping score. I'm a data analyst. I work remotely for a logistics company. I spend my days building models, identifying patterns, finding the thing that doesn't fit. I started applying those same skills to my own life, which sounds clinical, but honestly it was the only way I could make sense of what was happening. I made a spreadsheet. I logged every unannounced visit, every comment that implied shared ownership, every dollar borrowed. I noted dates and times. I kept texts and voicemails. By March, 10 months after Owen died, I had documentation of 37 uninvited entries into my home, approximately $6,000 in loans that had never been repaid, and a pattern of language for Margaret that consistently framed my house as a family asset rather than my private property. I also had something else. The month before Owen died, when we both knew the end was coming, we spent a lot of time just talking. About everything. About the life we had planned. About what I should do after. He was worried about his family, not in the way you might worry about people you love, but in a quieter, more specific way. He looked at me one night and said, "My mom is going to try to make this house a gathering place. She's going to push until you either give in or push back. I need you to push back." I promised him I would. I just didn't know how long it would take to get there. The breaking point came in April. I had been planning a solo trip to visit my own family in Oregon. My parents, my sister, a chance to breathe. I told Margaret about it in passing. I was going for 10 days. I asked her please not to stop by while I was away, that I had a neighbor checking on things. She said of course. Absolutely. She understood completely. I drove to the airport, I checked in, and then, because I had installed a smart home system the previous fall, doorbell camera, indoor cameras, smart locks, I opened the app on my phone while I was waiting at my gate. There were already 2 cars in my driveway. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the app, walked back through security, went to my car, drove to a hotel 6 miles from my house, and checked in under my maiden name. And I watched. Over the next 4 days, I watched Margaret and Dale treat my house like a vacation rental. They brought Dominic. They brought Dominic's girlfriend, a woman I had met exactly once. They moved furniture. They used Owen's workshop in the garage, which I had kept exactly as he left it, where his tools were still in the order he had arranged them. I watched Dominic take Owen's cordless drill out to the driveway and use it for something and then leave it sitting on the concrete. I cried in that hotel room for about 20 minutes. Then I got to work. I called my attorney, a woman named Frances who had handled Owen's estate. I explained what was happening. She said, "You have camera footage of them entering without permission." I said yes. She said, "Keep recording. Don't confront yet. Let's talk about next steps." We talked about next steps. Frances explained that I had options. I could change the locks remotely through the smart lock system, which would prevent them from re-entering after any of them left the house. I could call the police for trespassing. I could pursue civil action for the property damage, because even minor rearrangement of a deceased person's belongings in a home entered without permission creates liability. She also told me something I hadn't expected, that any belongings damaged or removed from the property could be included in a claim. I asked about Owen's tools. She said yes, those too. On the morning of day 5, I watched on my phone as Dale walked out the front door to his truck and drove away. Margaret and Dominic were still inside. I opened the smart lock app and changed the code. Front door, back door, garage side door. All of them. Then I drove to my own house. I pulled into the driveway. I sat there for a moment. I was shaking a little, not from fear exactly, but from something adjacent to it, the particular feeling of being about to do something that cannot be undone. I got out of the car. Margaret appeared at the front window almost immediately. I watched her face go through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, then something harder. She opened the door. Or tried to. The handle didn't move. She tried again. Then she knocked. I stayed in the driveway. She came around to the side of the house and opened the back gate and walked across the yard to where I was standing. Her voice was very controlled. She said, "We were just keeping an eye on things while you were away." I said, "I know. I've been watching." She didn't understand what I meant at first. I could see her processing it. I told her I had camera footage of every day they'd been in the house. Footage of Dominic in Owen's workshop. Footage of furniture being moved. Footage of 5 people I had never invited eating dinner at my kitchen table. Her expression shifted. She said, "This is Owen's family home. He would have wanted." I said, "Owen is gone. I own this house, and I need you to get off my property." There was a long silence. Then she said, very quietly, in the way that people say things they mean to wound, "You were never really family. This was his. You just happened to be on the deed." I let her finish. Then I said, "Actually, I've been on the deed since 2019. But since you brought up documentation, I have something for you." I had printed everything: the deed, Owen's will, the notarized transfer of sole ownership following his death. Frances had prepared a formal trespass notice. I held it out. Margaret looked at the papers. She didn't take them. I set them on the patio table. Dominic came through the back gate at that point, having apparently been listening from somewhere nearby. He started talking loudly about how this was not what Owen would have wanted, how I was being cold, how grief had made me irrational. He was wearing Owen's old flannel shirt. I don't know when he had taken it from the house. I hadn't noticed it missing. I kept my voice very level. I told him that he had until I called the police to return every item that belonged to my husband, including the flannel shirt he was currently wearing. He looked down at himself like he'd forgotten he had it on. I called Frances from the driveway. She had coached me on what to do at this exact moment. I told her they had not left the property. She said she would call the non-emergency line and I should stay visible and stay calm. 2 officers arrived about 18 minutes later. I met them in the driveway. I had the deed, the will, the trespass notice, and my phone with the camera footage queued up. I showed the older of the 2 officers the deed first. He looked at it for a moment, then looked at Margaret, who had come back to the front of the house by then with Dale, who had apparently returned while I was waiting. The officer said to Dale, "Sir, do you have any documentation showing a right to be on this property?" Dale started talking about how they were family, how they had a key, how Owen had always... The officer held up one hand. He said, "That's not documentation. It took another 40 minutes. There was arguing. There were tears, Margaret's, not mine, though the absence of mine seemed to upset her more than the presence of her own. Dale kept saying they had a right to be there as family." The officers were patient and very clear. They explained trespassing law in terms that required no interpretation. At some point, the younger officer noticed that the registration tags on Dale's truck were expired by 4 months. That became its own separate conversation before they left. And they did leave, all 3 of them, loading into 2 vehicles, with Dominic making a point of carrying only the items I specified from a list I had given the officer. Margaret stood at the end of my driveway and said, "You are going to regret this." I said, "I already have a lot of regrets. This isn't one of them." She got in the car. They drove away. I went inside. The house was changed in small ways that I catalogued methodically over the next hour. Owen's workshop was the hardest to walk into. They had moved his tool organizer. It was a small thing. Owen had spent 45 minutes arranging that organizer the first week we moved in. I knew where every tool was supposed to be. I put them back in order. It took me a long time and I cried through most of it, but I put them all back. Frances filed the civil paperwork the following week. We were seeking damages for unlawful entry and property interference. The number was not enormous, but it was specific and it was documented. Dominic called me twice over the following month. The first call I didn't answer. The second time I picked up. He said he thought we could work this out as a family. I told him that a family doesn't enter someone's home without permission. A family doesn't borrow money. It has no intention of repaying. A family doesn't stand in a dead man's workshop touching his things. He didn't have much to say to that. The case was settled 7 months later. Margaret and Dale paid a sum that covered the loans to Dominic, the attorney's fees, and a small amount for emotional damages. They signed a document acknowledging that they had no claim to the property. Dale's expired registration was handled separately in traffic court. I still live in that house. I still have the screen porch Owen built. I changed the locks, the physical ones, not just the codes. And I gave the only spare key to my neighbor, a retired teacher who brings me tomatoes from her garden in the summer and asks nothing in return. Last month, I finally unpacked the last 2 boxes from our move-in that I had never gotten around to. One of them had Owen's college sweatshirt folded inside, the one I thought I had lost. I put it on and sat on the porch for a long time. He told me to push back. I promised I would. I kept my promise. I keep thinking about the moment Margaret said, "You were never really family." She meant it to cut. And for a second, standing in my own driveway, it did. But then something shifted, because I looked at the deed in my hand, Owen's careful handwriting on the sticky note he had attached to it years ago, the one that said "just in case," and I realized she was wrong about almost everything. but especially that. What happened to me didn't happen because I was unlucky. It happened because I waited too long to act on what I already knew. I saw the pattern early. The unannounced visits. The borrowed money that never came back. The slow creep of language that turned your house into the family house. I documented it. I tracked it. And then I sat on it for months, telling myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as doing the right thing. It isn't. That's the thing grief does to you. It makes you confuse endurance with virtue. I endured a lot in that first year. Some of it was necessary. Some of it I allowed because I didn't trust myself enough to act on what I could clearly see. Owen trusted me. He sat in a hospital bed and told me exactly what was coming and asked me to meet it with a straight spine. It took me longer than he probably hoped, but I got there. And when I did, I didn't get there by luck. I got there because I had spent months building something careful and documented and unassailable. I had the footage. I had the attorney. I had the timestamps. I had every text and voicemail organized by date in a folder I had labeled, almost without thinking about it, the same way Owen used to label his. There's something I'd come to believe. Sitting with all of this, the outcomes in our lives are rarely random. Margaret and Dale didn't lose because the law happened to be on my side. They lost because they had spent years operating on the assumption that I was too grieving, too soft, too alone to push back. Every action they took was built on that assumption. And when the assumption turned out to be wrong, the whole structure collapsed. I had to be honest about what was happening. That took a kind of moral clarity I had to fight for. I had to be smart about how I responded. That took patience and precision and a willingness to learn things I didn't know, like exactly how Tennessee trespass law works and what counts as documented property interference. And I had to keep going on the days when it felt easier to just let it go. To sell the house, to disappear into something quieter. That took a stubbornness I didn't know I had until Owen was gone and I realized it was the one thing I couldn't afford to lose. Dominic still has my phone number. He hasn't used it in 8 months. Margaret sends a Christmas card to an address I no longer check. Dale paid his registration fine, and I assume drives legally now. I still have the house. I still have the porch. I still have the tool organizer, every piece back where Owen left it. Some things, if you fight hard enough and smart enough and long enough, you actually get to keep.